Do you remember a time when radio was a piece of functional furniture in everyone's home? It was the family's sole means of entertainment and contact with the outside world in many cases. Well, Ken Wilshire met a man in Williamson County who remembers those times. What's more, he's been preserving old radios for 60+ years with no plans of signing off.
What you're hearing are sounds from the golden age of radio. And they're coming from some of the original receivers of the time.
2, 3.
What else do you want me to do, Jack?
Just a minute, Mary.
Back then, with no television, it was the Jack Benny Show instead of Seinfeld.
We right out, Kimasabi?
Or in that general direction.
The Lone Ranger solved crimes on horseback long before CSI, and there was no MTV or CMT. Just good old music coming from big bands out of huge speakers and beautifully exquisite radio consoles like these.
It was built in 1932.
And while it may not be his golden age, these are the so-called golden years for 84-year-old Rudy Knight.
But the reason I'm so proud of this one was because it's one of the first.
He was just a teenager when he found something absolutely fascinating about these magical boxes filled with glowing tubes and lighted tuners. It truly captured his imagination, and this is when he started collecting radios.
The first radio we ever had, a fella at the hardware store, we hadn't bought one, but he and my dad were real good friends. And he brought one to us. It wasn't even in a cabinet. That fascinated me. There was those tubes, you know, burning in there.
It's hard for anyone to imagine today, but families gathered around the radio set for hours and hours, tuning into news and entertainment back then. The radio stimulated imaginations like nothing else before. It shrunk the world almost overnight, and it brought strength, comfort, and understanding during some of the country's most difficult times. And this is what fascinated Rudy.
People just listened to the radio back then. I was a paper boy for a little while, and when I'd go throw that paper up on the porch, I could hear that radio. People were listening to one of those programs.
And after enduring the Great Depression, serving in World War II, as a Navy radioman, of course, marrying his wife Jean, fathering children, running a business, and much more, he's still collecting. In fact, his collection is filled with over 125 vintage radios, from some of the first ones ever manufactured to battery-operated transistors of the 60s. This is one of the smallest and oldest radios in Rudy's collection. It's called the Cat's Whisker radio, and it simply takes signals out of the air and amplifies them through this crystal. And no batteries are required, just a headset.
I've enjoyed this old RCA over here.
Rudy says there are bigger, fancier collections out there, but you sure have to buy old radios for the love of it, because they certainly aren't worth much. And once he brings one home, he begins restoring it to working condition in his shop.
I'm not like some people that wear them to death. You had to get it back to perfect shape, just like it was originally. I don't worry about that. If I can get the cabinet in good shape and get it looking good and get it playing good, I'm satisfied with it. I was going to go over here.
Rudy's collection has filled the couple's sitting room, but Jean still has a little nook for her computer. She truly understands what radios have meant to her through the years. She heard President Roosevelt declare war on Japan. She copied lyrics from songs she heard on the radio that made her think about Rudy and sent them to him overseas. And while she didn't know where he was most of the time, it was the radio that kept her aware of what was happening with World War II and brought some comfort that Rudy was okay.
The radio was pretty much our communication with the outside world. I have one in the center bedroom, and it was the one that I was listening to when President Roosevelt made the message that we had been attacked. And we found that in an antique store in Lebanon, and I recognized it, and Rudy bought it.
Rudy knows every one of the radios in his collection, and it seems there's a story behind each one.
This is called an Erla 18 radiola. Over here is a one-tube radio, Stromberg Carlson, and it's called a Feda 19 and 23. This is the oldest one I have.
Jean and Rudy have been married for 63 years, and in one way or another, the radio has always been a part of their lives. Well, except for the 37 Ford when they were dating that did not have a radio. Neither one of them wanted to say much about those sparking days. But when asked what's kept them together, Rudy and Jean would probably say, in radio terms, of course, stay on the same frequency, keep tuned in to each other's needs, and let the electricity flow.
I had her picture in my locker, and every time I opened my locker door, I could look at her. I thought she's beautiful. She still is.
Radio certainly has its place today, but never like its golden age, when life wasn't as complex and it was a bit slower. Radio was a trusted part of family life, a beautiful enhancement to one's home, and a major contributor to a household in harmony, just like the harmony we found at Rudy and Jean's.